Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durrag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land that this podcast was created on.
Welcome, listeners and watchers, to the Prose and Cons podcast by Precipice Fiction, where sometimes we feel like prose and occasionally we feel like cons. With me today, I have two very special guests, special because they're special people, not because they're not usually here. I have one, James Healy.
Hello.
And I also...
hello, I'm James Healy.
Thank you.
I'm James Healy. I'm a writer from Ireland. I'm known for Cooling Engines, which was my addition to the first Precipice Fiction anthology, the new Mythic. And I also dabble in kind of short horror and science fiction stories.
Lovely. And of course, we have Ulrich Boylan, better known as Paddy.
I also go by Paddy. I am a writer, sometimes editor, sometimes technical writer, but the thing that I love most is being a writing teacher, and I teach to high school-aged children abroad over Zoom. And I like to batch a bunch of science fiction and weird stuff.
Fantastic. And my name is Alex. I will be your host for this evening. I have written in a couple of different, fiction journals and magazines and things, and I contributed Town Hall Steps to the new Mythic anthology, which I met the narrator recently. I spent New Year's with him.
Cool.
Lovely guy, and did a really good job on that story. It reminded me how much I enjoyed the process of going through that.
Yeah,
cool. All right, so today we have a little bit of a ephemeral style of concept here for our podcast. We are discussing the difference between plot and story, and if you're wondering what is the difference between plot and story, well, just hold that thought.
Stick around.
All right. So, what have we all been? What have you been reading, listening to, watching, Paddy?
Well, on the last podcast I recorded, and I chronologically, we don't always release these in order. Peek behind the curtain. So this is yeah. Who knows? I'm still reading it by the time it comes out, but I'm listening to an audiobook of a book called The Money Changers, which is a business thriller set inside a bank. And it's very good. I'm listening to it because my current story for the new anthology that we're writing, the new Mythic is what we're calling it. That's not what it's going to be called, but that's the working title, is set in a business environment. And I realize I have no idea how these people like talk or act. So I decided I'm going to do some research and read similar fiction. It's very good, but I'm up to chapter 18 and I looked at the audiobook and there's 45 chapters. And I thought I was getting to the end of the story. And I just realized, there's a lot more. And as good as it is, do you ever guys get that? You're reading a book and you're like, it's good, but I don't know if I can do it for another 200 pages.
If I like it, I like it. If I don't like it, it's not good. That's how my brain interprets.
I'd usually push on, particularly because I'm like, I've liked it up until now. What's going to happen, or what is it that the author, if the author's going to lose it, what is it? Why did they lose it? But also that feeling of I think I'm nearing the end. And then realizing something else is happening. Whatever transitions you on into the next, whatever you think is the ending going to be, whatever transitions you on into the next thing, if that's done well, that could just make for a really good flowy story.
True.
Yes.
Just shoot it off. Yeah.
I love that you guys stick with stories, but I'm a quitter. And so I'm considering quitting this one. But that's me. The Money Changers, quite good, despite me wanting to get off the train.
Okay. All right, James, what have you been listening to, watching, or otherwise consuming?
Over the Christmas, I watched the Dune 2.
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, it's good.
Of the second part of the first Dune book, which I thought was absolutely phenomenal. Really, really good.
I heard it was funnier than the first film.
Yeah, a little
funnier. Yeah, I think there was. I think generally a lot of stuff worked a lot better than the first one. It just felt like it flowed a lot smoother. I enjoyed the first one, but it felt like they were throwing so much in and doing no exposition that it felt like I remember watching it thinking I haven't read it because I'm following this, so I haven't read the books.
Yeah, a little bit.
The second one just felt like it's I guess because they've taken the second half of the book, they don't have none of the world building is already done, so the narrative just flows. But the immersion and the ambience and the cinematography and the music and everything in the second film just felt so epic and so cool, and I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I recommend it.
Making me want to watch it now.
Yeah.
Check it out, definitely. And the soundtrack is awesome.
Nice.
Very good. It's a lot of fun. Cool. And I've been on a an existential like identity kick in terms of shows. Not my own.
Christmas will do that. I find.
Yeah. No,
Really?
The old New Year's.
Really?
Yeah. Most
I
suicides
find
are
Christmas to be a
over-
jolly affair, but
Do you not start
strokes?
questioning self?
No. Too much
but
of a quitter.
It's been in terms of. Have you guys ever heard of the show Severance?
Yes, I really enjoyed
Yeah,
Severance. I thought it was a little janky, but ultimately really good.
A little janky? That's interesting.
I think it was a little janky at times, yeah.
I'd like to discuss that further, but not here.
Okay.
So I've been going through that, and I've also been watching Westworld, which is amazing. I'm actually going
Okay.
to bring that up a little bit.
What season of Westworld are you on?
The first one. I'm just watching.
Okay, it gets so much worse.
Right. Can't wait.
Sorry, I mean, you might disagree, but
we'll see.
By season
anyway,
3.
So I've been doing that, and then also listening to an audiobook called The Fisherman, which is a Lovecraftian horror sort of thing. It's just starting to get to the good stuff. I was really on the start of being like, maybe this is not for me. Maybe this is overrated. It won the Bram Stoker Award, but no, it's starting to kick off, so that's good. All right,
who's that by? The Fisherman?
It's by John Langdon, I think. John Langan. Cool. John Langan. Yeah. It won a Bram Stoker Award in maybe like 2016. I want to say. I don't know. It won one at some point. Cool. Let's get into the meat of the episode now. The soft, chewy center of the episode. Yeah.
Delectable.
What we're going to discuss today is the idea of plot versus story. And if that has you scratching your head, don't worry. We're going to elucidate that. So let's break down the simpler part of that, plot versus story. What's plot? You can pretty much identify plot fairly objectively. And the idea of a plot is just the stuff that happens in a story. It's literally the facts, the events that take place. Basically, what you could write down in a couple of sentences and explain the whole thing with none of the extra fluff, with none of the extra characterization or thematic conceits or anything like that. That's plot.
Like when you see a plot summary online, like just the bare bones of a movie.
You have no sense of tone, character, mood, any of that. It's just the facts. Right? It's it's a précis essentially. So story is a little bit more hard to define, and I've seen videos recently saying what's the difference between plot and story, and I went through them, and there are conflicting ideas about what it is. So I'm kind of going to throw my hat in the ring and try and work out what it is here. And we're going to break this down over the course of the episode. And Paddy and James, you may agree with me and you may disagree with me, and that's fine because that's what we're here for. So the idea of the story is basically everything else. The stuff that gives meaning and heft and emotional resonance and relevance to a piece of fiction. I'm going to use the term meaning. I know we were discussing before the podcast, James, and you said you'd prefer to use the term narrative, which is also relevant.
Well, I think what we said just there, you said like it's what gives meaning to the things, and I think that actually like that fits perfectly. Like I think that fits exactly what I would think of it as well.
Okay, cool.
Whereas meaning by itself would feel like kind of the message of the story, or maybe what's being communicated.
I see what you mean.
Thematic conflicts, but to give meaning to everything in the story, I think that actually makes that's exactly what I've been thinking as well.
Okay, cool. So that's what we'll go with it, and that idea is pretty broad and pretty existentially confusing. So we're going to break that down now. As far as I can tell, we can break that meaning given of the greater context of the story into 4 different categories. The first one, pretty obvious, it's characters. We're looking at arcs, we're looking at emotional development through the characters. The second one is themes, so the thematic resonance of a story. What are the greater sort of things it's trying to say about its world and what's happening? That is the other one. The next one is mood. You may have heard this described in high school as tone as well. We're talking about the feel of the work of fiction. How does the writer write? What language does he use? What feeling does he convey? Just in a pure emotional gut punch sense. Is this generally a happy story? Does it make you feel tense? Do you feel paranoid? Do you feel despair? What is the mood of this piece, and how is that being achieved? And then the final one, which my girlfriend came up with, and I didn't think about, but I think is actually really, really relevant, is the cultural context in which it is developed. For example, the difference between say, the cultural context of The Wizard of Oz, now, for example, and Wicked. You know, you could combine those, like, in some ways the same story, like a different take on that story, definitely, but a completely different cultural context, even between productions, even between, say, the musical itself and the movie. Very different cultural context between 2000 and 2024.
That's interesting. So the cultural context is something that isn't implicit to the work itself. It's always something from the outside. And it's the only one of those four that comes entirely from the outside.
Yes.
How interesting.
That's true. And that's something I want to discuss as well. But we will get to that. We're going to start on what I think is the easiest thing. And I did promise you guys I'm not going to monologue here. So I'll just sort of flesh it out and then we'll start discussing. Characters. I think this is the easiest thing to understand in terms of giving meaning to a work of body. A work of body, a body of work. Either a work of body or a body of work. Anyway, the idea of a character arc, of a character developing from a point where they're like, okay, I'm just a little orphan who's just on the street, and I've been swept up into a gang of, like, you know, cheeky thieves on the streets of London, and now I have a mentor, and that's the sort of and you know, Oliver Twist goes on this journey, and eventually he is adopted, and he has an arc, a full arc, character stuff. I think this is probably the primary way in which we imbue meaning into a story in terms of how the character develops. What do you guys think about that, James? What do you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like you said, the plot being just a list of events by itself might not carry much of anything to it. But then how those events impact the character and how the character responds and grows through that journey, that in itself kind of is its own little story. So that is a story. So yeah, that is definitely probably one of the bigger ones.
Yeah,
the bigger ingredients.
And I think that, like, there's the reason why I want to divorce plot from this so much is, like, there are a lot of stories out there which, like, quote unquote have no plot or aren't heavily reliant on plot, and they oftentimes they'll use the characters and the way they move and bounce off each other and interact as a really strong driving force. There are some of their big events. I mean, one of the books that I always talk about is Empire Falls by Richard Russo. And essentially that's just a guy in a small town who's put upon. Eventually there is a big event that forces him to sort of change. But until that point, he's just really kind of bouncing off characters and things and growing and changing and being molded by those sort of events. So yeah, what do you think, Paddy?
I think almost certainly character is the main thing. You know, Alex, did you know I listen to a lot of history podcasts? Is that something new about me?
I've never heard this.
No,
I did.
I listen to a F-ton of history podcasts, and they talk a lot about narrative history versus non-narrative history. A lot of historians say if you inject too much narrative, or I guess story, into history, you are coloring it in prejudiced ways, you're robbing it of objectivity. Maybe, but it's much more dry. This is the reason why people don't like hearing about economic history or how much grain surplus led to a famine and that caused the revolution. No, what we always want to know is which characters butted heads against which characters, who wanted to overthrow who for power. Non-historians generally only care about the human beings, the characters in the story.
Yeah, because they're relatable.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. If you ask people, about the war in Syria at the moment, for example, most people can't give you like a proper answer. Over the last 10, 15 years, and if you ask people about what was the war in Germany in the 1940s, most people can tell you what happened, because that had it was
an amazing roster of characters.
A cast of characters.
Yeah, it had a narrative. Thing in Syria is so complicated, and there's no one side versus another side, so it doesn't stick in people's memories in the same way, so people kind of can't attach to it. So
100%. Well, I think we need characters for stories to even begin to interest us. So
yeah,
that was something that
sorry, go on, James.
That's just almost a digression. It was just something that the Romans did, was that because before they were writing things on paper, they were chipping stuff into stone. They didn't do it. Everything was told through word of mouth. They would just summarize groups of people as a single individual. So all of their stories was this kind of David versus Goliath. That would have been two different groups of people fighting each other.
We do the same thing. I think we still do the same thing.
Easier to remember. Yeah, we do the same thing essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It's like the only time you can personify a country at war with another country is if you go, and then Germany did this because they were mad about France, doing this, grain. I don't know what's the grain embargo on them for some. That didn't actually happen. I just wanted to use the word embargo.
It's a good word.
But yeah, we characterize. So this is one of the ways in which we imbue meaning into a story, and we're able to take it in and digest it, and it has emotional weight. Okay, so that's one of them, right? Do you guys have anything more to add about characters specifically?
Not right now.
Not really.
Not right now.
Just to double down on your point, if you look at films like Little Miss Sunshine or something, the plot of that is very just this family is trying to go cross country to go to this pageant, but everything about the story is how the family interacts. So it's all character driven.
Yeah, so exactly.
Example. Yeah.
And the characters kind of move the plot, if you were. I feel like I'm making plot a dirty word here, and it shouldn't be. But I really want to.
Yeah, no, it's like it's one part of a recipe. Like
it is
by itself. It doesn't do a lot. Yeah,
because right. I can give an example of some like later something that doesn't work. I don't think because the plot isn't very strong, even though the story is. So.
Yeah, exactly. Even though the ideas of what happens are, and sequencing is its own thing as well. We've all heard the story about A New Hope, or maybe you guys haven't, about how the first Star Wars film ever made was kind of a shambolic mess until George Lucas's wife came in and was like, no, we have to, because she was the editor, we have to move this around. Yeah, absolutely. There's a great like little mini documentary on it. And you watch it and you just see it just doesn't work, like, because it's sequenced really weirdly. And it's just nowhere near as effective. But then it's kind of shuffled around. And yeah, I'll try and find it and link it in the thing because it is a really good documentary.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, at the risk of digressing even further from the outside, it seems like that plot is sort of eternal. Like, of course it was organized like that. There's no other way that plot could have been. But that's just because Mythic. It works so well and so it feels so coherent. Yeah.
No, it was totally different. Just not in terms of this is what I'm saying, not in terms of the story, but in terms of how it was sequenced, how the events happened together. So anyway, we're going to move from most tangible to slightly less tangible. Okay, so we're going to look at mood now. Now, the idea of a mood is universal to any piece of art. So this is really how we convey the feeling and the emotions that the piece of the work of art gives us. So if you look at the Mona Lisa, it might convey feelings of, and I'll bring this back to narrative, but it might convey feelings of nostalgia or sadness or mystery. You get these feelings from it, and those are imbued into the work of art. Now, I'm gonna read.
Can I ask? Are we? Would tone be another way of saying this?
Yes.
Or are we talking about?
Yeah. Those are actually two sides of the same coin. So tone, I believe, is the vibe that the author wants to put into a work, and mood is what we get out of it. So I think those are the two sides of it. If I'm remembering,
I've not heard that that before, but okay, I like that.
If I'm remembering my English Year 9 class properly, I think it was that, but I'm happy to be corrected. So yeah, like I'm going to read you out a passage that I think really sort of conveys this. And this is from Scott Smith's The Ruins, which is a really good, really scary book that just moves very quickly. And this is right at the beginning before anything spooky's happened, but you can kind of just feel it. The bus wasn't at all what Amy had expected. She'd pictured something dirty and broken down, with rattling windows and blown shocks and a smell coming from the bathroom. But it was nice. There was air conditioning. There were little TVs hanging from the ceiling. Amy's seat number was on her ticket. She and Stacy were together towards the middle of the bus. Pablo and Eric were directly in front of them, with Jeff and Matthias across the aisle. As soon as the bus pulled out of the station, the TV turned on. They were playing a Mexican soap opera. Amy didn't know any of the Spanish, but she watched anyway, imagining a storyline to fit the actors' startled expressions, their gestures of disgust. It wasn't that difficult. All soap operas are more or less the same, and it made her feel better, losing herself in a little in her imagined narrative. It was immediately clear that the dark-haired man, who was maybe some sort of lawyer, was cheating on his wife with the bleached blonde woman, but that he didn't realize the blonde was taping their conversation. Yeah, so that from the beginning there, like the first line, we hear the bus wasn't what she expected. She pictured something dirty, broken down with rattling windows. Even though the bus isn't like that, even though it's being described in the negative, of something that's not happening. What do you think of when someone's like, don't picture a broken down bus with rattling windows and rust stains and all that? Like it puts you in frame of the feeling that you get is, oh, okay. But if it's not that, then what is it? Like you feel unsettled, right? And then she's put into this place where she's watching a soap opera and she can't really work it out. The author keeps you on the back foot. You're there's this sense of paranoia almost. It's very, very low level at this point, but it ratchets up and ratchets up and ratchets up. So that's kind of an example of what I mean by mood, and that is a very subtle example, but the point is it starts there and it just keeps going. It just gets more and more and more tense.
I have a much dumber example. How every sort of like dark detective thriller is mostly going to be set at night, and it's usually going to be raining.
Yeah.
Right. And even something like the weather and the time of day establishes the mood. If there was sunshine, the movie would feel different. So
totally. Yeah, 100%. What about you, James? Can you think of any moody?
I'm thinking of the same book, The Ruin, because I remember right after that, I think it's Jeff is looking around at the rest of the party, and he is kind of observing. He's getting the sense of how ill-equipped they are to go on this hike. Particularly, he's looking at Eric, I think, and Eric is really hungover, and he's worn the wrong shoes, and someone has worn shorts, and they're probably going to get scratched in the leg and stuff. And he's kind of looking around at the group and assessing them and being like, they're not ready, which gives you the sense of foreboding.
Yeah, ready for what?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess it gives the sense of foreboding, which would be the tone, but then the mood is also that it makes you look at Jeff and kind of be like, what a weird observation for him to be making, if you know what I mean. It's not necessarily a protective thing that he's doing, because he might have turned around and been like, maybe we shouldn't do this. It's almost like another thing. So I remember getting a sense of Jeff's a bit of an odd one too.
He is. I would really like to do a podcast with you one day where we just talk about The Ruins, because I love that book so much. It's like it's kind of a perfect book in exactly what it does. But
and it all works out well for them, right?
Oh yeah, it works out great.
Sunshine and roses.
Yeah, because the tone totally turns around.
Yeah. Okay, so taking that example and going to another direction, another thing that I think does this really well, it's kind of best in class and almost set the stage for a whole genre of movies and sort of things like this, is Top Gun. Have you guys ever seen Top Gun before?
Yeah, like a long time ago.
Okay, so it sets up this feeling of like, like the vibe of the 80s. Yes. It is like the apotheosis of the 80s. There's they've got these, the glasses on, and like there's naked bodies, and they're like high-fiving each other, and they're riding on motorbikes to the sunset. And like, there's all these action. Like,
if I could sum up that, it's everything will be great forever.
Well, yeah, but then Goose dies.
It feels like just an American flex is what it feels like.
Yeah, it does.
It does. Yeah, it's kind of like low-key propaganda, but that's almost the point. Do you know what I mean? It's just it's this. And when you think about that, the plot of that movie isn't much to write home about either. Like, like we're in like aviation school, and like this guy's kind of a douche, but I got my buddy. But also there's this chick, and she's really hot, and then my buddy dies, but it's all cool. Like, that's pretty much the plot, But there's just this sense of like almost infantilizing Americanization about it. That's just like, yeah, come on, we can do it. That gets satirized in movies like Team America and stuff later. Like, and I just think that's kind of the polar opposite of that, like tense, like everything's a little bit messed up. So yeah, it's another way of conveying meaning. I know I sound like a broken record, but that's okay. Can you guys think of any other examples of like really clear tone setting or mood setting?
I can think of a really delicate one, and maybe this isn't tonal setting, but as you were talking, I was thinking about Starship Troopers. Because if you just explain the plot of Starship Troopers to someone, it is one kind of film. If you watch the film, is it the mood and tone that's doing? So for anyone who doesn't know, Starship Troopers is a pretty spot-on satire of militarism, I think, is a way to describe it. Is that the tone that's doing that, or is it the themes?
It is the tone that's doing that for 100%. You've actually really hit the nail on the head there, because it's actually taking the idea that I had before, the concept of like the American imperialism and like we can get them and let's kill Russia and everything, and it's satirizing that. It's taking that Top Gun vibe and then being like, look how silly this is. Like, we're replacing Russians with like aliens that eat people's heads, and it's blowing that up. But you're right. In terms of a plot, you could make that a very, I don't know about serious, but you could make it a very like, sincere action movie if you wanted to.
Oh yeah. Well, it plays out like the characters are super sincere.
Yeah.
And in the first half of the film, you have all of this. There's like points where the film just stops to do these like advertisements for the military, which are kind of, they're like just really
propaganda.
I don't know,
over the top.
Lenny Riefenstahl level
like
shit.
Really, like really exaggerated propaganda, and then all of the actors are played by kind of like young, attractive Hollywood, and it's all really, really gung ho until they have their first fight, and they are massacred, and it's really horrific.
Absolutely,
and it kind of just gives this idea of like the militarism is just there to like throw the youth into this war and have them destroyed and stuff, and it's very good film for like the satire and the stuff that it does with it.
There's a bit of a tonal shift there in that bit there where they start to, and it's so stark that it's actually a bit funny. Like it's just so this
it's
complete
limbs
about
flying
face.
through the air. It's like, almost comedic, but then they've also got the characters just screaming and being dragged away. So it's
yeah, exactly. Good. Okay, cool. I think
great film to watch. Yeah.
It is great.
Just another one. Just another one on tone, and this is a film as well. Without giving spoilers, Dune 2 does like really good stuff with music and like the cinematography, where there's kind of a character goes through a bit of a change. Not probably 2/3 of the way through the film, and I feel like everyone will know the scene when they see it, because it drops in this kind of black and white coloring afterwards, which refers back to something that happened earlier on in the film. And the music changes. It's the kind of the same beat that's been going on throughout the film, but now it changes to a minor key, and it just gives this sense of like, this isn't necessarily a good thing. This isn't a big victorious proud march. This is something that's quite bad, could potentially quite bad and quite heavy happening. But that's a great total shift in the film, and that just gives you the feeling of like, oh wait, hold on a second, maybe this isn't as.
I'm excited for that now.
It's good.
Check it out, man. It's great.
I think I know what you're talking about through just knowing what happens in Dune, but I'm curious to see
it. But the point is, it's doing that without there being this. I mean, I guess there is an event that changes, but like, it's really
it's totally not on the nose. It's one of those things that's like, it's the back of your mind kind of thing. You don't notice the color change, you don't notice the music until you kind of go back and watch it. Like, look at it and go, it's just happening. Okay. But you get the feeling of like, no, I'm not on the side of this.
Cool. Okay. All right. So the one I want to look at next, because the last one is I feel like the most intangible, and I feel like we may spend the least time on it. The one I want to look at next is cultural context. And I think this is actually really underrated in terms of what something is. So have you guys ever heard of the concept of a palimpsest?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it's a text hidden beneath a text.
Yes, that's exactly right. So so basically what it is it's a text that's been overwritten on so many times that it's this stack of this layer on layer on layer of different things. And essentially all art is a palimpsest. You've heard of the cliche of we're building on the shoulders of giants, right? So in that respect, we are sort of looking at what are the cultural forces that brought this story into being, and what implication does that have on the story itself? And then secondarily, what texts is it borrowing from, and what are the thematic resonances of those texts? And we'll look at them a bit later. But a good example of this, again, that it was come up with by my girlfriend because she's kind of a genius, is the Hunger Games. So the Hunger Games, are you guys both familiar with the book? Have you read it or seen the movie? Or
I've seen the movie once, but I use the Hunger Games over and over again as like a reference in teaching, because every young person has seen it apparently. I know it anyway.
So I'm referring to the book. The movie is very good, but I'm more familiar with the book, so I'll go with that. Basically,
I think they're both fairly close.
They are, especially the first one. I think this is pretty beat for beat. So the idea is essentially the context is, well, look, I'll give you the plot first. The idea is there's this girl who's thrown into this this death game sort of thing, and basically she
Battle Royale type thing.
Yeah, she has to fight for her freedom, which in itself is not a particularly original concept. However, the whole idea of this is it really kind of zooms out into the world building of like, hey, this is a dystopian society where essentially the the youth of all these different tribes are brought in and made to fight each other to keep the tribes under wraps, right? Now that idea was basically formed from a combination of like W. Bush era, some post 9/11 stuff, and also a number of previous texts that had gone before, like Battle Royale, for example. There's 1984 is kind of more of this historical context thing with the dystopia. You can even say The Running Man by Stephen King. Ding, there it is. Which is kind of one of the original death game sort of things. So basically, the idea is if you just took this as it was by itself, you could go like, okay, well, this is just about this. But really, you're looking at this whole like convergence of forces to go, well, what shaped this? Where did this come from? And what does it say about the society that it came from? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I would like to disagree slightly. I don't personally, I don't think The Hunger Games is a work that has really changed by its cultural context. And I don't think one really needs to know the context of it to appreciate it. I think someone in many different eras with many different cultural contexts could see The Hunger Game and pretty much take away the same messages. Like, yes, obviously it had antecedents in terms of the works went before it, but I don't. Starship Troopers, I think that has cultural context. Lenny Riefenstahl, okay, like Triumph of the Will, regarded as like a great work of cinema, really. But if you know that it was like a piece of Nazi propaganda, that changes everything. Just my opinion, but I don't think Hunger Games is culturally contingent. What do you think?
I mean, look. You could sort of argue that if you showed an ancient Roman the book and they were able to read it and it was translated into Latin or whatever, and they could read it, then they could
think the capital of the good guys.
They would think. Well, they would think anyone who didn't want to fight was like the worst person ever.
Like, why are we following this slave with a bow and arrow?
Yeah. Well, maybe if a gladiator read it, they might have a bit of a different
Well, generally the Romans, not to go on a Rome, but generally, if one Roman demonstrated that he didn't want to fight, all of the other Romans would be like, "Oh my God, that was the worst. That was the worst transgression ever. Like, what a terrible person."
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It would even insult the other gladiator that the guy didn't want to fight.
Oh, right. Okay.
You've really embarrassed me now.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. All right. Well, fair enough. But maybe your example there of cultural context is better. Starship Troopers.
I feel like, because I've never really thought about it this way, I feel like perhaps the story changes if the cultural context changes.
Oh, yeah.
Because the story will read differently if you take it out of the time and place that it was written.
100%. You guys seen Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Yeah.
Do you remember that incredibly racist depiction of like their landlord? It's the worst like racist caricature of a Chinese man I've ever seen. And I wasn't really enjoying the film, to be honest. But once I saw that, I got off the train. I was like, nah, screw it.
Yeah, right.
Now that I think about it, that actually doesn't change my understanding of the story. So this is a pointless digression. But it did make me not like the film.
Okay. Yeah.
Editor, got this.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of something like. Okay,
so I will point out that because I've been reading about kind of Japanese culture and Japanese storytelling, they use a completely different plot than Western storytelling.
Okay.
Which is one key detail is that Western characters need to be active at the beginning of the story. There needs to be something missing, and they're pursuing something. Whereas in Japanese culture, possibly shaped by Buddhism, is that the character actually needs to be content at the beginning. Or not, it doesn't need to be, but usually the character is content at the beginning of the story. And this is kind of what demonstrates that character has some kind of, there's something noble about them, or there's something good. It's just that they're content, they're chilling, they're sitting by a lake, simply enjoying their life. And then something comes along, an external thing comes along, create a bit of conflict for this piece.
Yeah.
The story, I guess the story plot, like direction doesn't change as much because of that, but the way the character is framed, that the story is very different. So Western audiences might look at a lot of Japanese stories and find them kind of slow, kind of a bit of a slow burn at the beginning, because the character isn't pursuing something and there isn't that sense of conflict until kind of the second act. So that changes how the story is interpreted, which I guess changes the story, changes the meaning of all the ingredients. We would look at the character as static, whereas they would look at the character as content.
Yeah, that certainly vibes with a lot of like anime. Like I'm thinking of say like Demon Slayer, is it, where like the the kid's just like, I'm just living a happy life, and oh no, demons attacked my sister. But like he's pretty chill before that. And most like Dragon Ball Z is the same thing. Like Goku's just like, I'm just hanging out training, and then something comes along, and that like happens continuously. It's like, cool, we beat the bad guy. Now we'll go back to living a great life. Yeah, I'd say another example of this is I'll go back to 1984 itself. Like that book, particularly. Oh no, better yet, Animal Farm. Animal Farm is a direct, and this is very, very on the nose because it is direct parody and satire. That's a direct satirization of the basically the Iron Curtain and like Russia in that period, I believe. He's just like, hey, look, this is what will happen if communism sort of takes over. So in that particular instance, that gives us a cultural context, which I mean, it's still sort of relevant today because they're very universal ideas. But that specifically was like, hey, this is pointing it to this thing specifically.
Understanding the history informs the work.
Yeah, exactly. It informs the work and gives us basically I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, I don't know how much I feel this shapes. So I saw an animated version of 1984, not 94, of Animal Farm when I was quite young, and I didn't really know anything about Russia. And obviously, there's bigger themes and there's bigger relevance at place. But as a kid, you follow what's happening. You follow that there's a takeover, and you follow that they've changed the rules, and that's unjust and stuff like that. And I feel like the story is the same story. You just may not get the relevance of as much of it if you don't understand the context.
I'm not necessarily saying like we experience it differently. That's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that the actual creation of it itself is formed from this cultural context. And yeah, sure, divorced from it, we don't necessarily, we can still get enjoyment out of it and do it. But still, I think that does form a basis of what has created it. Like without that cultural context, I feel like a different story would have been told, even if we, didn't pick up on all the nuance of it. Does that make sense?
So do you mean rather the cultural context which the story grew out of, rather than the cultural context in which the story appears in?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry, that I probably didn't make that clear. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like the cultural context in which it was birthed is providing all this extra data and all this, like, I mean, the perfect example would be Lord of the Rings, right? Like, yes, Tolkien is like, no, it's not really World War I. It's not, but how could it not be? Because he's gone through all this trauma, and it's just painted in such black and white lines that like there's this war, and the orcs are in some way representative of at least a negative force invading, and the hobbits and the dwarves and things are more like the allied forces. So while we can read it today and be like, well, that doesn't feel like World War I, without that cultural context and without that basic impetus, essentially, it would be a different story. Like, I'd say, do you think that story would have happened if he hadn't gone to World War I don't think it
probably
would.
Not.
And that is
conjecture,
but I feel like that's kind of the impetus to do that story, and that's sort of what I'm referring to. And you can't really escape that culture. It's kind of self-evident. It's like, the context in which you exist informs the story, I suppose. So maybe it's a little bit, Anyway, so that's that one. And then the last one I wanted to talk about was themes.
Nebulous theme.
Yeah, that's why I saved the best for last. Because it is very nebulous, but it's also, I think, very important. So let's go with The Shining, because it's right there, and I've only had one Stephen King.
Yep. Rack them up.
So, The Shining is a book about a man struggling with alcoholism and trying to do the right thing by his family. So we have someone who, and you can, this becomes, the themes are severely twisted. This is actually a good example, because the themes are severely twisted by which version we go. If we're talking about the book, you're talking about someone who's fundamentally good.
Yeah.
And is essentially destroyed by this. Yeah. Well, basically good. I can see you frowning there, James. But someone who is essentially a good person who is kind of destroyed by this external force. Now, The Shining, the movie.
I heavily disagree, but we'll come back to that.
Okay, fair enough. The Shining, the movie, is more like Jack Nicholson is, you can
already
tell
crazy from the start
twisted.
because he's Jack Nicholson.
There's no way that guy is
No.
ever representing anything like a hero, a modern hero.
No,
but
or a stable, sane individual.
Yeah, but I think that, okay, so thematically, the themes of those kind of
Jack
are cross
Nicholson.
purposes. Like the first, and you can disagree if you want, James, but I do want to try and articulate this. The themes of the first one is like, look, basically, someone is consumed by forces that he's not able to control. He's trying to, but he's not able to. He abuses his son at the beginning, and then as he goes on, he is more and more entrenched in basically alcoholism. Then this spirit sort of takes him over, and eventually it becomes too much, and he can't. So it's a story thematically about losing control of things to your desires, right? Now, the Kubrick film, which I personally don't really like, but I will acknowledge is a really good
so
film,
good.
is I don't even know. I think I don't like that as much because I can't put a nail on the theme. So if James or Paddy, if you guys want to jump in and elucidate,
I don't know what the theme of the film is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it has a strong theme.
Yeah,
So if you can think of an audience, write in and let us know. But you know what? Example of an amazing film without a strong theme.
What do you think, James? Do you think there's a thematic resonance in the Shining?
The theme, I guess I'm struggling with the theme because it's kind of the subtext kind of hits me right away. In the book, Jack has already broken his son's arm previously and lost his job from punching a student.
Yeah.
And he is kind of in a place where he is saying, like, I've done a bunch of bad things, and he's trying to be a better person. I think quite notably in the chapter The Bees, which happens at the very beginning of Act 2, so it's potentially the house may have already been working on him, but I think very significantly, Jack's attitude about the things that he has done in his past that negatively hurt other people, he's kind of seeing them as not his fault or the fault of other people.
Okay.
I think that lack of insight is kind of fundamental to demonstrating that he would never have changed. And the subtext of the story is a story of a man who a man who goes mad and tries to kill his wife and child, and that would probably have always been his digression. It's just because he ended up in this place at this time, it was sped up.
Okay.
So to me, I felt like the themes were of kind of like domestic abuse, and I suppose because he's a recovering alcoholic, I don't know how much alcoholism plays a role, but you could argue that the beast or the entity, the Shining, is representing alcohol. But I always thought the themes there were sort of domestic abuse and the kind of horror of, just family by themselves in this house, and the father goes mad and kills the wife and kid, and that kind of thing happens.
Should we define theme real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Redefine? Yeah, I mean, like the subtext is, if you take the monster out, it's the story of a man who goes mad and tries to kill his wife and kid.
Yeah.
I guess the theme that was there was then, the theme is domestic abuse. Sure, that's how I understood it.
Yeah, see, I think I would disagree about whether he would have eventually killed his wife and kid by himself. I don't think he would have. I think maybe he would have done some other things, and probably they would have gotten divorced, but I think it wouldn't have got to that point, because I think that I think certainly King's version is that the house is working on him more strongly enough such that it is. I mean, but I think, but that trajectory, the difference in that trajectory is the difference between those themes. So, and I think the thing about themes and why it's so nebulous is that you actually can interpret them in different ways. Like, we have pretty subtly different versions of how that goes. Like, for you, like, no, he's always going to kill him. For me, I'm like, I don't think he would have. And so for me, the theme is someone struggling against something and being overcome by it. But it's fundamentally hopeful. For you, I think it's, well, no, this is the trajectory of someone who's essentially, criminally insane functionally, and is going to destroy everything that he loves almost in spite of himself. So those are two, like, from just that very subtle variation, we have two very different, like, projected kind of outcomes and projected themes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we interpret it differently.
Yeah. And then the movie, I think, is a completely different thematic take as well. Like, I think that's a very, very jarring shift. Like that one's just like, oh no, he's just bad. Like that's kind of what I don't like about it. It's just like, oh no, he was just always bad and it was just always bad. Like everyone, yeah.
Should we define what theme is?
Yeah.
Sure. Do you want to have a crack at it?
Yeah. It's the pervading message or idea or concept that runs through the film and sort of underpins it. So underneath everything will be like a single message or a single. It's different to tone because tone is a feeling. This is more a concept. It's more of an intellectual idea usually. Alcoholism could be a theme.
Definitely.
Or,
loss of control, for example, or
human cruelty or human
domestic
kindness.
Abuse. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So long as
through line. It's
so long as it
through
pervades the whole film, that's a theme.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Or book, obviously.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to get another good example because theme is actually really juicy and really like important.
Okay.
Well, Titanic has a really strong theme of, I suppose it's class differences, class struggles. You know, Rose is kind of trying to debate whether she wants to stay in the upper class and get married and do these things, or whether she wants to kind of go with Jack and kind of live a life. And then there's a lot of live life with the underclass, and then there's a lot of back and forth within the story of framing. You know, the upper class are kind of talking negatively about the lower class, and the lower class are having loads of fun. But then when the disaster hits, it's the upper class who get to get off the boat. The lower class are stuck. So there's good conflict there as well with that theme.
Studio Ghibli. Just about every Studio Ghibli film, one of the themes is humanity versus nature, and not always in a humanity bad nature good way. It's often like, can these two forces coexist with each other, and that inherent tension, and that is a strong theme in just about everything the guy's done.
I'm trying to think of something I've seen recently. I'll use Severance because I've seen that recently. So Severance is kind of the idea of for anyone who doesn't know, the concept is fantastic. It's about the idea of like your work self, the person you are at work, being like medically kind of cut off from the person you are at home. So you walk past through the door and you turn into like work version of Alex or Paddy, right? And then when you walk back out, you become yourself again. So
and
essentially,
you have no memory of what happened at work is or vice versa.
What essentially happens is you create these two different personalities, and one personality is just working, and seconds after they walk out the door, finish work, they come back in, right? So you've essentially set up this dichotomy between people. So I guess a version of the theme would be work-life balance in a greater extent, but I think also the nature of control and
exploitation,
exploitative capitalism specifically.
Yeah,
exploitative capitalism, basically turning people into machines, into people in machines who sort of just do their job and have no other agency throughout that. Would you like to add anything to that, Paddy?
Nope, nailed it.
Cool.
Great series.
Yeah, it is, and the second season's coming out in 7 days, so I'm really excited.
Yes, it is.
Cool. All right, we'll wrap it up there, I think. All right, boys, I'm going to ask you, James, what are the pros of prioritizing story over plot?
I guess if you just have plot without all of the other ingredients, your story is going to be pretty bland. You need to have character, theme, relevance to the cultural context, and the other things that we went into today. Otherwise, you'll just have a bland story.
Cool. And Paddy, what are the cons of prioritizing story over plot?
Imagine someone took all the bones out of your body. Okay, you still got the organs, your face is still there, all the skin, you still got all your senses. That's great, but you can't stand up and walk anywhere.
Now imagine that as a story.
Wonderful analogy.
Thank you.
Now I do have a quote actually that's by, of all people, Seth Rogen, and this is about the 40-year-old virgin, and this is about this exact concept. Okay, plot is the things that are happening, and the story is what it's actually about. The plot should be the thing that seems like the most important thing at first, and the story should be like in there but barely recognizable. Then as the movie goes on, that ratio should completely reverse itself. I think that's a nice take on it.
Food for thought.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been Pros and Cons. I've been Alex. James has been James. Paddy has been Paddy.
Often.
Often, most of the time. And we, if you're interested in listening to or reading our work, we have an audiobook version of the new Mythic. It is on audible.com. There's also the ebook, and you can actually also get a physical copy if you're interested. And look, we would love for you to leave a review of this podcast because that's how podcasts get more podcasty in podcast land. That is
That's
a
how we
technical description of what
It
happens. And yeah, so please leave that review if you can on Spotify or Apple Podcast or whatever. Until then, we'll see you later.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.